Okay, howdy partners. This is Massive Effect. We make your website go from this to this. Today we're taking a look at a landscaping website, and it has a couple fatal design errors that I would call that. And you have to make sure you don't copy this if you're making your own. A lot of people will copy websites and they're making their own. They're doing the do-it-yourself. They don't know what they're doing, so they're looking at what other people are doing, and they're just copying whatever looks good in their estimation. So let's just start right in. And one of the main ones is the fact that we have these trust elements, right? Trust logos, and they are bottom and to the right, but they're in a right-hand column, and that is the worst possible place to put those. For the past 20 years, web users have been educated into the fact that the right-hand column is where nothing important lives, such as banner ads. So there's a thing called banner blindness or ad blindness, and a right-hand column of a website is going to be basically invisible to the visitor. Now, obviously, this 12 is visible because it's so huge and bold, but just psychologically, this whole area is kind of blocked in the mind. And it's unfortunate because we have some of the most potent elements of this website down here. So not only are they in the wrong place, they're in the worst place. So we need to get these elements moved and put up here towards the top. An example, putting it like that, right? Putting it right up front where it can be seen. And these are key for building trust, and that's one of the biggest hurdles you have to get over when you're trying to take visitors and turn them into calls or form submissions or conversions, is to build that trust. So these trust elements have to be plainly visible right up front and not hidden away, especially on a right-hand column like this. So that is huge. The right way to do it would be to have your navigation, your big hero shot, as they call it, nice big value proposition, call to action, and then some logos here to build that third-party trust, third-party confirmation, which builds trust. So that is a really big one. So when you're doing your site, make sure you don't do that, and try to figure out what logos you can put. In this case, it's a general contractor, so they're putting certificates, right? If you were another company, you can put your clients, logos of past clients. Oops, like this, right? And even if you don't have Forbes as your past client, it doesn't matter. You can just put those logos and it's still going to have a similar effect, all right? So when you're doing your website, definitely make sure to do that. Other points about this design, which you should definitely not copy, would be the fact that it's just a one-page shot, right? Like we do one scroll and the website's done. And this area is entirely blank, so the website actually ends almost right here. So it's almost a one page, a one frame. Let's zoom it out a bit. Basically one frame for this whole website. This is how websites were made for many, many, many years, as far back as I remember, from the late 90s into the early 2000s and into the late 2000s. This is just how they were done. And you know, looking back, it's a terrible idea. But back then, there weren't 2 billion websites online, right? You know, right now, that every day is another 500,000 websites being launched. So back in the day, you could afford to have a non-optimum design and not very thought out, and just something like this, just splashed together. Here's the logo, navigation, and a picture, and you're good to go. But these days you can't. You have to be a lot more intentional with your web design. So if you're doing your own website, don't copy an older website like this. Don't think this is sufficient. Just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean that it's correct. You need to know what you're copying. It also depends on your business. If you're a small service-based business, what you really need to do is make the homepage a full experience. Let me show you another example of that. So, you know, this is someone who's obviously not a web designer, and they just took a WordPress blog and throw on their logo, navigation, and then a whole bunch of text. And you know, this just won't do it all, right? This is not selling me. It's also not communicating, right? The same with this one, without this guy. Let's go back over here. This really doesn't communicate anything. I land on here. I understand that they have something to do with landscaping, no problem, and I see some cool photos, but there's no communication. And this is your one shot to communicate and give the full impression of your company. And a site like this actually doesn't communicate anything. It's communicating 50 different things at once, right? Our number, our logos, navigation, logo over here, slideshow, some posts. There's no, it's a bit dispersed, in other words, right? And this one there's just so much content that you don't even want to read it. Like, who wants to read this? Nobody, right? Unless you're part of the 3% who are buying now, right? So a better approach is to space everything out and make each section intentional, right? This is very spaced out. We have one statement. There's not a lot of conflict between these elements, right? This next section has one purpose, right? This next section. So you make it more bite-sized and you break it down into sections like this, each with its own intention and its own message, as opposed to something like this where it's like, hey, here we are. So instead of trying to communicate everything at once, you're actually communicating nothing. And I think you know what I'm talking about. That's something you can observe in other areas as well. The same thing with this. We're communicating everything in this one long page, and in the end, nothing really gets communicated because it's all just jumping out, and it's not differentiated. Whereas here, each section is visually different, right? You're gonna tune out if you're on this. You're just gonna zone out, because it's almost hypnotic. Okay, heading, button, paragraph, heading, button, paragraph, heading, button, paragraph, heading, button, paragraph, heading, button, paragraph. You're basically being hypnotized when you're going through this site. And then with this one, it's just, there's just so much right in your face, you don't even have a chance to really think. And then you go over to something like this, where each section is visually different. It's got hierarchy, right? We have a big heading, subheading, small text, big heading, subheading, button, right over here, big 1, 2, 3. We've got hierarchy. Each section's a little different to maintain interest, right? And separate things out. So that's something you should really keep in mind when you're making your design for yourself. Don't try to cram everything on one page like these guys do. And then also don't just dump everything in one column of a sea of text like these guys are doing. Take this approach where you're just doing section by section, having a lot of space to breathe, and then have each section be one intention, right? This one's just for testimonials. This one is just for a blog post, right? This one is a message from the owner, right? Projects. And just space it all out like that. And don't worry that it's super duper long. It's totally fine. People have been educated into scrolling endlessly, because that's the way it is now online. People just scroll forever. So there's no bonus to being able to say, hey, look, my whole website loads on one screen. Isn't that killer? Not at all. That's really not an advantage anymore, because none of this is going to communicate, because it's too much all at once, right? There's no clear message. Whereas over here at J.W. Bailey, you're getting them the message piece by piece, right? And eventually you get the full treatment. If you scroll all the way down, you see all the sections, and you get a much better experience than you would here, right? Because we're taking you through each section and building more and more interest, more and more trust, and et cetera, et cetera. So that is the advantage for doing that. And then again, back over here, make sure you don't get into a hypnotic rhythm of repeating the same things over and over again. People are just gonna zone out, and no one's gonna consume this content. So you've got to vary it up a bit. All right, so I mean, there's heaps wrong with this website. We're not even going to get into this website's design. I'm just touching on the text and the headings over here in these sections, but this is a whole thing in itself. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you're using Wix or WordPress and you're making your own website, it would really benefit you to take a little course on Udemy, udemy.com. You know, pay $10 and just learn a little bit about web design, because you're going to end up with something hideous if you don't. What was that one scooter website? Like, here's a Wix website, right? Like, just so you know, this is what you could end up with. Don't end up with this if you're building your own website. Don't let this happen to you. This is horrendous. I would rather not have a website online. So if you're going to do your own website, which you shouldn't unless you're a web designer, but if you want to make it a hobby and it's fun for you and you want to save a few $1,000s, at least spend 10 hours on udemy.com learning some principles of web design, so you don't end up with something atrocious like this. Because the website's supposed to communicate. It's got to communicate, it's got to enlighten, it's got to sell, it's got to create desire, it's got to look great, and it can't do that unless you know exactly what you're doing. So go over to Udemy and learn a bit, and don't just willy-nilly copy people's websites, because you don't know what you're going to be copying, right? So that's the idea. Of course, if you can't be bothered and you want to work on the business and not in the business and have a pro do it for you, which is what you should do, come on down to Massive Effect. We can take care of it for you. We've made heaps of websites for hundreds of years, and you're in very good hands with us. So just come on down. And we have a fun program where we're partnered with a nonprofit rescue team. So if you get a marketing package with us, we will train a first responder. Isn't that wicked? So then we can turn victims into rescuers and save some lives together. Isn't that awesome? So come on down to massiveeffectmarketing.com and we can take a look at your website. If you have a website, go ahead and put it in the comments. If you're building a website, put it in the comments. If you're, trying to figure out what to do, put it in the comments. Show me your website, show me where you're at, and we can do a little video and I can show you, give you some pointers, show you what's good and what's not good. If you don't know what's good and what's not good, then you don't know what to stop doing and you don't know what to strengthen. So it can be very confusing, like walking through a swamp blindfolded. So you don't have to go through that. Go ahead, put it in the comments. I'll do a little video to help you out for free, no worries. So just go ahead and do that. All right, so until then, thank you very much and take care.